Hello, my name is Meredith, and today's video is going to be annotating Fourth Wing. Basically, I've been wanting to do a deep dive into this book and to figure out what the deal is here. Why is it so popular? Why do people love it so much? Is it really all that good? And do I genuinely enjoy it, or am I just getting swept up in the tide? And the second purpose for this video is to show the value of book annotation. So this book is insanely successful, and so I want to study it. And so in order to do that, we're annotating. Okay, so what does that mean? That means marking up the pages. That means taking these sticky tabs and tracking certain elements throughout the book, tension, pacing, how characters build, how relationships change, that kind of stuff. You don't have to color code. You can do whatever makes you happy, whatever allows your brain to track and to digest. But today, I'm just going to show you how I annotate to more deeply understand and dissect a book. If you go on to enjoy this video or get value from it, subscribe to see more writing content and book dissection videos from me. I also have a Fiverr link down below for developmental critique and book coaching, so if you want me to do this to your book, let me know. Book mail has arrived. And there she is. I feel like the cover design is honestly like half the marketing on this thing. So the annotation color scheme is going to look something like this. On spoilers, I will give a warning if I say any, so just, be aware of that if you haven't read it yet. Okay, so I've marked in here my tab colors. Light gray is for structure beats. I want to figure out like why the threshing was at 30%, what the midpoint is, because I don't remember it having a midpoint. And then I remember that the finale starts really, really late and kind of just hits you out of nowhere. I want to find and identify the finale, see how it feels for there to be no lead up to the finale, and see what that does to the structure and to the pacing. The next color down is like a light gray. That's going to be beautiful lines or anything meaningful or deep, something that is going to stick with me that I'm going to keep thinking about for a time to come. The next one is going to be sense-making issues. I remember my first read through that there were quite a few sense-making issues where the world building didn't make sense, the premise didn't make sense. I'm going to be looking for those things and seeing if they cheapen the story or if they're easy to look past. Like greenish yellow one, that's going to be character triumphs. How does she affect amazing character transformation? How do relationships change in a convincing, transformative way? The golden one, that one is going to be epic, awesome, amazing, jaw-dropping. There are definitely those moments in this book, and I want to mark them. I want to remember them. And then the very, very last one is like generic, not done as well as it could be. A burgundy color down there, and the label I have is disappointing, broken promise, writing craft issue unspecified. Now I think all that's left is to get into annotating. So I'll check back in when I have interesting things to note. All right, so I've annotated chapter 1. So the tabs that I used the most were structure beats, because we hit about 2, maybe 3 structure beats. I also use a bunch of green for sense-making issues that I found, and then also there's a bunch of character triumphs. And so this makes a lot of sense because in the first part of the book, we're basically doing setup. So that's what all these are marking, is how these things are getting set up. So we have all of these yellow tabs setting up the character. Violet has weaknesses. She's also determined. She doesn't want to be seen as weak, but she also owns her weaknesses. And so there's a lot of really great things for the character and also setting up this tension, stakes, urgency. So right off the bat, all that good stuff. World building issues are all right here because this is where we're introducing the world. So these things are pertinent right now. All the green is like all the things they're mentioning where I'm like, yeah, I don't think that's how the real world would work. But also, whatever, this isn't the real world. So there's this trade-off of sense-making issues where, again, like I was saying, the world building is like a little bit contrived, but what it does is it has a payoff in doing something really well that the reader's gonna like, such as creating stakes or tension or a sense of movement and urgency. So there are a lot of trade-offs like that in this book. I think most of them are pretty forgivable. They accomplish a really readable book. And then we've got a couple structure tabs. So that's this one. So basically page 1 is inciting incident, but it goes along with the theme of this book, which is high stakes, high urgency, high tension. I think that's one of the reasons this book is such a hook. I'm doing some very late night annotation. I'm having a really fun time with this, and it's such a different experience reading this as a physical book rather than audiobook. Like, I feel like I'm getting a lot more from this, and I think I'm just enjoying it a little bit more. And I also know what to expect going in, so it's a totally different experience. I keep changing the annotation code in the beginning of the book. I'm not mad about it, but it's no longer like rainbow coded. I added one for Xaden, I added one for Dane, and I added one for writing craft techniques that are really working in the book's favor. I don't know why I hadn't had that before. I think it had them in a couple different categories, but I was like, I need a general one of these because I kept finding really great times when like the suspense was just like on point and they introduced intrigue with unanswered questions and there was great tension. And I was like, you know what? This scene really works and I need a sticky tab specifically to call attention to that fact. So I created one for that. I'm almost on page 100. Look at how beautiful that is. I really do feel like this project is a work of art. It's also a deconstruction project where I am being a little harsh, but I'm finding things that I'm absolutely loving and that are really working. Like if you're gonna have a project that's gonna be work intensive, you might as well be annotating Fourth Wing. So I have hit 50% of the way through the book. A quick refresh on some of the things that I've been using a lot more of. I have actually found a couple of these like beautiful or meaningful lines, and I really enjoyed looking out for those and finding them. We are moving away from sense making issues because we're not as much in the world building phase. We're really in the deepening relationship phase. We've had a couple of these epic awesome moments, which are super fun. I thought they were going to be almost all towards the end, but there are definitely some in the middle. So look at this color here, like a puke green kind of color. And this is for Dane being a bad dude, but only legit times. I'm not like overly judging him. It's just what he's doing on his own, all by himself. No, this is totally my fault, but I should have picked a better color for Dane because unfortunately, this is the tab that I'm using the most is Dane. It's literally all over the place. We have a healthy dose of some Xaden moments, which have been very fun to kind of track the progression of things. So I'm trying to figure out if the threshing is the midpoint because it's at 30%, like I was saying. And I still don't know because it's just not in the right place. There's too little beforehand, way too much after. Let's look at all this stuff that comes after. But this is still reads like fun and games. So maybe it's just like plot is plot sometimes and we don't need to worry about it. And then I'm also adding structure beats kind of for their relationship. So like first hint of enemies becoming something more. And also then the self-realization of feelings, that's always an important step in a relationship. I've hit some really good writing craft moments where I'm like, that was well done. Like this scene just absolutely ups the tension and the stakes and everything. And it just does such a good job. Like this scene right here, really awesome. Okay, so after hitting the smack in the middle of the book, I am retiring for tonight. We'll be back at it again tomorrow. I am now 75% of the way through annotating Fourth Wing. It has been quite the journey. Very exciting stuff. Let me update you on what tabs are being used frequently at this point in the story. So basically, I had to add a tab for things that made me smile, things I enjoyed, and I didn't have a tab like that. I think I was going way too academic with it, but that's also just how I am, so that checks out. Also, Liam is in it now, and he's just so much fun. He is like just a ball of light because he's kind and he's friendly, but he's also like involved in this other group. He just really brightens the story. I actually created the lines that make me smile sticky tab specifically because of him. So Dane really hasn't been in the picture a whole lot, or at least he kind of learned his lesson a little bit, and so there's not as much of that gross green color. There's obviously a lot of black tabs for no reason in particular. And the forest of green tabs in the beginning has thinned out because basically if I come across a sense making issue, I'm either over it or have already, explained myself enough in previous tabs where it came up the first or second time. Or also it's just that we're moving on from like discussing, the basics of the war college. And I've also used a bunch of tabs for writing craft things done well. There's one conversation between Mira and Violet, and I was like, this is incredibly well done. This just gives me so much empathy for who these people are, and it just really helped them come alive. Things like that are things that I'm tabbing. So I've been on the hunt for the midpoint. I think because of the structure of this book, the midpoint actually doesn't matter. So basically, here's my theory on this book. She does tension and pacing and suspense and stakes really, really, really well. And they all counterbalance the fact that it doesn't have much rising action because there's not a villain. There's no big bad. There's just like some mini villains of like some school people who like, aren't really gonna get her. There's no like saving the world type of aspect to this book. It's just like a magic school and like a training arc. So basically what this book ends up being like is a long sequence of fun and games until we hit the finale at the very, very last 10%. So basically what I'm saying is a midpoint in this kind of book is irrelevant because there is no turning point that changes the game. The entire book is just like what we call like the muddy middle, but it's not muddy because it has very, very clear pacing. So it's very well structured for not having what I would think of as more of a typical plot structure of like this huge rising action. Like, I don't think it has much rising action. It's like a gentle, gentle slope. You don't even notice it. And then you hit a trigger point, and then it's all like sky high. We haven't hit that trigger point yet, but I am looking forward to it because that's my favorite part in the book. So the three things that this author does insanely well. Character relationships are incredibly strong, realistic, believable, and dynamic. They change, and it's really cool to see. Number two, basically the bucket of like pacing devices that I was talking about, like the tension, stakes, suspense, pacing, all that stuff. She just is masterful at that stuff. The third aspect is the protagonist's character. Violet is really cool because she's down to earth, she knows her weaknesses, she's self-deprecating, but at the same time, she has self-confidence. She knows herself, she knows what she wants and what she doesn't want, and she will stand up for herself. So that's a really wild combination of like relatable but healthy mindset. And you don't find that a whole lot. Usually when a character is super, super relatable, they have like a self-confidence issue, but she doesn't. But yeah, so those are three things that I think this book does insanely well based on my recent read through. So this right here is a list of 8 issues that I have with the book. Okay, and then in the back, we have an entire essay on why this book works. I probably won't go over it in this video because this video is about annotating and not about the absolute intricacies of this. So annotation is really, really cool. Just as a study tool, it like helps your mind organize pieces of information. And if you want to understand story better, especially like why a story that's incredibly popular works, this is really going to be the thing that's going to take you there. The ending of Fourth Wing, I think, will probably always hit really, really hard. It has great payoff. Let's say that about the book, right? Like, fantastic payoff. I finish it. If you can't tell, it is done, has been completed. Project is at 100%. The ending twist will always be my favorite. That last page smacks you in the face, and that's what I want out of a book. So everything past like 90% of the book is really awesome. But the stuff that's in the other 75% before 90% is really not my favorite. It's interesting because when I read the audiobook, it was like, oh wow, this is getting so good. I really like it. But as I was actually just reading in the physical copy, I was like finding a bunch of sense making issues and it was distracting. So we brought back the green tabs, which I didn't want to have to do, but I did. She does a lot with these last 50 pages. And so there has to be a setup because the whole book hasn't really done that much to set up like this actual conflict. Like it's done some things. It's definitely done a lot of foreshadowing, a lot of relationship building in order to do this. But basically the details need to come together right here. I think some of it ended up being contrived because of that, unfortunately. The reason that they're going to this event and the setup of who is going to this event in what groups does not make sense. And the fact that certain people in these groups did not see this coming based on who had set up what things, it doesn't pass a logic check for me. So, okay, that's a point against it. That's okay. Cutting in really quick here, this is Meredith from the future, where I have thought really deeply about the midpoint and what's going on with the threshing and all of that. I'm incredibly excited about what this says about storytelling, but actually I think I have way too much to say, and I don't think I'm going to be able to include it in a clip at the end of this video. So I'm going to film a separate video and put that out next week talking about what Fourth Wing's midpoint, or lack of a midpoint, says about storytelling and what you can get away with. If you're interested in that, stick around for next week. I'm not going to be able to talk about it here. So enjoy my final thoughts on Fourth Wing. Some overall things I learned from this book, that you can have a likable protagonist and that they don't have to be super annoying. Like, they just don't have to be. Their flaws don't have to ruin their choices in the plot. Like, they can actually make good choices and the plot can still be difficult. But they can still be flawed and still have things to overcome, but those flaws don't have to make them bad people. You can have flaws that make people bad people, but you can also have a person that's like really striving to be the best version of themselves. And I think that's really cool. The other thing I learned is about tension. Tension is the backbone of this book, but it never gets boring because the tension is perfectly staggered. Okay, so let's lay this out. So you've got an A plot, which is the external plot. So it's everything going on in the war college. And then you've got the B plot, which is everything going on in the relationship. Okay, that's how Save the Cat talks about the external story versus the internal story. Both plots do the same thing, which is basically that tension is high almost all the time, but the tension is not high on one problem all the time because that gets taxing to the reader. So basically, what happens is tension is high because they need to solve a problem. They rise to it, they solve it. There's a tiny dip of like, oh, we did it. That's great. Instantly, new problem. And that's how to keep a reader interested. So, a lot of times, what happens in romance stories is that as soon as the couple emotionally gets together, all the tension is gone and it gets boring. In this book, every time it seemed like they were getting close to solving their issues, another thing would come up. And then, oh, it's do I trust him? It's like, oh, he kept this from me. It's, oh, he doesn't want to be vulnerable. So, even if they get to the point of in one moment totally solving all of their issues, probably in the next moment, something else is going to come up. And so that means that the tension is never fully resolved. And so it keeps you interested in their relationship throughout the entire book. And the only time I caught myself being like a little bit bored was when it felt completely resolved. And then, like a page later, new problem started. I don't necessarily know what this says about the human brain, but it is just how stories work. So I'm going to go with it. This book hooks you with, I want to know what happens next. And it's incredibly effective. There are issues with it, like I said, sense making stuff. And I think just the overall culture building does not sell me. That's okay. A lot of people love it. It really threw me off. There were times when people were throwing around the word vibes and voluntold. The line gives me absolute life was used, and the word toxic. I don't associate these types of phrases with fantasy novels, so it kind of jolted me out of Fantasyland and it brought me back to high school. So that's just not my style of prose. Some things were just a little bit too modern for me in a fantasy novel. There continue to be tons and tons of things to say, but for the sake of one little YouTube video, I will leave it here. I have a lot of admiration for Rebecca Yarros and what she's accomplished here with this book. So that is my take on Fourth Wing, and also will look into my annotations. And I feel like after doing this, I've come away from this book with a really good idea of everything that's contained within this book, the strengths and weaknesses, and also things to emulate, and also things to kind of watch out for, mostly in the sense making department, because I know that sense making in a fantasy world can be just so hard sometimes. And so just something to keep looking out for. Once again, if you want to really, really thoroughly read and understand a work of fiction, I suggest annotating. That's all for this video. Happy writing and reading and studying great and mediocre and all in between works of fiction. I will see you in the next video. Bye.